So we are coming to our next speaker, Amanda Cattermole, with the Zero Discharge Hazardous Chemicals Group, a program founded as commitment of major apparel and footwear brands and retailers. Looking forward to your presentation.
Good morning, everybody. So this is actually following directly on from Thomas's presentation. So I'm working in the textile, apparel, and footwear industry. And so this presentation is actually specific to this sector of the industry. So today, I'm going to talk to you about a specific work stream in the roadmap, and I'll get to that, to zero discharge of hazardous chemicals. So this work stream is focusing on the prioritization and phase out of hazardous chemicals in the apparel and footwear industry. So zero discharge of hazardous chemicals by 2020 is a collaboration in the apparel and footwear industry that started in 2011 with just 4 brands. And those 4 brands they did a fantastic job of really laying out the groundwork to move towards zero discharge of hazardous chemicals. We're now at 17 brands, and we continue to grow, and we continue to want additional stakeholders to be involved in this initiative. Brands are actually being required to really focus on chemical management and a chemical management strategy. And that's because of really the EU and REACH regulations, as well as many states in America, such as Washington, Maine, and now California, are being asked about residual chemicals on the products that the brands sell. So all of a sudden, we need to get more intelligence around what chemicals are used in the products that we sell. Many brands already have restricted substance lists in place. The problem is how do we consistently control the restrictions of these chemicals? Each brand tends to have very different RSLs, and the goal is that we're going to be more powerful if we can speak as one voice. So the beauty of actually collaborating across an industry is your individual voice becomes very powerful as you align around consistency. So this is the beauty of ZDHC, and this is the beauty of the roadmap. So the roadmap specifically sets forth a plan with actions and timelines and commitments that we've made towards zero discharge of hazardous chemicals by 2020. So what do we do and how do we do it and where are we going? So I'm actually going to go ahead and read our vision. It's very lofty. Hopefully you guys can follow along. So we envision an apparel and footwear industry that delivers high-quality products using safe chemistries, operating in ways that keep communities free from unintended downstream environmental impacts, and delivers to a market where sustainable chemistry practices are preferred and rewarded. That's a very aspirational, lofty vision, and it's supposed to be. So let's break it down and talk a little bit about it. So although our commitment may be zero, I do think that it's important to share with you that the word zero has created many, many debates. I'm sure we could debate it all day today, and I don't want to go there. However, the vision is really focused on how do we create and scale technologies and practices that enable great products. That's critical, right? We've got to make great products that are manufactured free from unintended harm and unintended chemicals. So that's the vision. It's really not about zero. It's about scaling best practices. In addition, the audacious goal of zero rings very well with the public. If I think about drinking decaf coffee, it's much more effective if I say, I'd like a decaf coffee, rather than, I'd like a cup of coffee with just a little bit of caffeine in it, please. So we're really moving towards this movement towards zero so that the focus is on continuous improvement, so that by 2020, we're going to see very, very big changes around the number and amount of hazardous chemicals that we use in our supply chain. Within the roadmap, there are 7 key work streams. We have a key work stream. This is a very big work stream. It's around chemical hazard assessment, prioritization, and action. We have a work stream around training, right to know, assessments and audits, a management systems approach, stakeholder partnering, and then an additional work stream around chemical management best practices. Today, I'm going to be focusing on part of work stream 1, or chemical hazard assessment, prioritization, and action. So I'm sure many of you know that the apparel and footwear industry requires a diverse number of chemical inputs to produce our finished product. We literally use thousands of chemicals in our supply chain. Among those, we know that there are bad actors or nasty chemicals, and that the industry must tackle these. So the question is, how do we prioritize those bad chemicals? How do we know what they are, and how do we prioritize them? So we put together a small team of brands focusing on this, and we set up 3 objectives. The first one is to develop a transparent, validated process to prioritize hazardous chemical substances. The second is an action all around developing key actions against those hazardous chemicals. And the third one is to encourage the research, development, and implementation of safer alternatives. So our focus is really on the most hazardous chemicals, and we've defined those as those chemicals that are PBT, CMR, and endocrine disruptors. So it's very similar to what Thomas said before. So we're not reinventing the wheel here. We're using the same definition around hazardous chemicals. We do, however, recognize the need to address more conventional pollutants that will give you high BOD, COD, and total suspended solids. That piece of work actually is moving into a different work stream about best available practices in the supply chain. So we haven't forgotten them. We know they're nasty, but our focus is really on the PBT, CMR, and endocrine disruptors. So you may ask ourselves, well, why prioritize? Why not just eliminate all of those chemicals? And quite frankly, to really bring it up to the surface, we don't have the time to do that. Our goal is, our resources and time are finite, and we want to make sure that we're spending time on the chemicals that will have the greatest impact. And if you go back to our vision, again, it's all around continually improving our product and the impact of manufacturing on human health and the environment. In order to do that, we want to go after actions that are going to create the biggest change most quickly. So how do we prioritize, and what do we prioritize? By 2015, in our joint roadmap, we've made these commitments. We would have developed a transparent process for assessing and prioritizing chemicals, and that's what I'm going to share with you in a minute. We would have developed a publicly available list of substances targeted for phase-out and/or research. We would have communicated about and achieved phase-out of initial priority chemicals in the top 50% of the supply chain. We would have developed and implemented a well-defined manufacturing restricted substance list. We would have set up an evaluation and substitution process referencing other frameworks. And we would have identified and assessed PFC alternatives to avoid regrettable substitution. Let me just double-click on that last piece. We know that perfluorinated chemicals are sort of floating around as chemicals of concern. We also know that they play a very important consumer benefit around stain management and durable water repellency. We know that there's a lot of work that needs to get done in this area, and initially there was a work stream within ZDHC that focused specifically on perfluorinated chemicals. Since then, we've expanded this work stream to include other trade associations such as the Outdoor Industry Association in America, as well as the Outdoor Working Group in Europe. So that work is definitely happening. We're digging deep and double-clicking to find safer alternatives. Here is our work stream overview. This is what I'm going to talk about for the rest of the presentation. So on the left, you can see pages of thousands of chemicals. And then next to that, you can see 3 circles together. And that's our framework. So that's what I'm going to talk about now. But more importantly, what are we going to do once we prioritize the chemicals? So some chemicals will defer, and I can talk to you about why we're going to do that. But other chemicals, we're going to actually action. And the key piece of what ZDHC does, by working together with 17 brands, and we're growing, we can actually really have a strong influence on and a big voice on how to phase out and prioritize some of these chemicals. And this is the beauty of collaboration. So this influence piece really trumps everything that we're doing. So what do we do? The first thing we did is we built a database of chemicals. And these are chemicals that are already restricted in some way or that exist on some kind of watch list. These chemicals, we hope, are pretty much specific to the textile, apparel, and footwear industry. And when we pull together this list, we have approximately 800 chemicals that we need to address. We were hoping it was going to be significantly smaller, but it's actually 800 chemicals, which is a little bit of a shock. So next, we started to build our screening or our prioritization screening framework. And we went ahead and we worked closely with a few brands in July, and we put together this screening framework with some guiding principles. So we wanted to make sure the work directed in, that had direct, was able to have maximum impact. We wanted to be pragmatic, transparent, relevant to our industry. We wanted to include hazard as a first screen, and then we wanted to make sure that we could actually action rather than get caught up in analysis paralysis. And of course, we wanted to run it by some key stakeholders as well. As everything in ZDHC, it does include continuous improvement, and this is really critical to the work that we do. So we will continuously move and modify this framework as better data becomes available, as we can make progress on existing chemicals, as we learn more about chemicals and how they're used in our supply chain, and as global legislation changes. Here's the framework. It's based on hazard, volume, use patterns, and then with this wonderful opportunity to influence the results. So hazard criteria. We used the green screen method and the green screen list translator to identify the most hazardous chemicals. Green screen assigns chemicals at benchmark 1 through 4, with benchmark 1 being the bad actors around CMR, PBT, and endocrine disruptors. The green screen list translator is a way for us to use an automated software approach where we can actually identify these benchmark 1 chemicals. There are 2 databases out there. One is called GreenWorks, and one is called the Pharos database. So we actually input every single chemical CAS number, and we got out the hazard data from that. We then are able to rank. So we have a very high ranking all the way down to no data or low. So the first 3 ranks, very high, high, and medium, are focused on benchmark 1 chemicals, chemicals that are CMR, PBT, and endocrine disruptors. From a volume perspective, this is where we didn't want to get into analysis paralysis. By using, our goal is that we identify chemicals that are global volume that are used in the textile industry, which is really, really hard to do. So we are relying on industry expertise to help us there, and we're going with a high, medium, and low. We're not looking for tonnage. We know we can't get there. It's really looking at high, medium, and low. And then use patterns. We're beginning to ask ourselves, where in the supply chain is this chemical used, and what is the purpose of the use of the chemical? We know in many cases the same chemical has many, many different uses in the supply chain, and we will be focusing on the specific use and then acting on that when we prioritize. We're adopting the ACC method here. So it's a high ranking if there's direct commercial and consumer use, a medium ranking if there's direct industrial use, and a low ranking if there's no intentional use. And now we get on to my favorite, which is influence. Once we know where and how the chemical is used, we can then influence what we're going to do about it. So we obviously have greater influence as a bunch of brands working together on chemicals that are used on finished goods or in textile material processing. We have a much lower ability to influence when we think about raw material processing, such as cotton growing and cattle and sheep rearing, and also around chemical industry intermediates. So the way we're looking at this is, what's the biggest bang that we can get for our buck as the brands working together? We can really influence the elimination of a dye much more easily probably than the elimination of a pesticide used in cotton growing. So the overall prioritization, if you look at hazard volume and use pattern criteria, it's going to be high if all 3 criteria are high or very high, medium if at least 2 criteria is high or very high, and then low if no more than 1 criteria is high or very high. From an influence perspective, ZDHC will lead the action if it's very high, and then we will continue to engage with other stakeholders if we really can't drive that. So again, this is really showing that we're a whole system working together. So the next question is, what do we do once we've identified and ranked the chemicals? So each substance will be reviewed and assigned an action. So we're going to have a phase-out track where substances with known substitutes can be phased out, for example, APEOs. We are developing an MRSL, and the goal is that many of these substances will be placed on an MRSL. There's also going to be a research track. So chemicals with no known substitutes will be placed into a research track, and our goal is that we can really collaborate with key stakeholders to start to develop safer alternatives. So we want active engagement with brands, suppliers, textile associations and NGOs, regulatory agencies in all 3 regions, environmental and social NGOs, the chemical industry, international development organizations, and academic institutions. So thank you very much.